What's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Join with me, as always, with Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. We are now about midway through the second round of the NBA playoffs. It's been absolute insanity in both conferences, to be honest with you. We've had some great games, had some pretty good matchups, a lot of competition. It's been pretty interesting so far, man.
I mean, there's been upsets as we predicted, right? As I think everyone predicted, these playoffs were great, have been great, and are expected to be great. I think obviously injuries, unfortunately, have hampered some of the playoff excitement, which I think, granted, at this point is just is gonna be a yearly thing. I
Pretty
hope
much.
not, but I think at this point it looks like it will be. And I mean, but yeah, like the playoffs in general have been amazing. Both conferences especially have been really good, and the fact that we're seeing, bottom seeded teams get far in the playoffs, I think it's a real good thing for the NBA.
It's a testament to the parity that we've been talking about all season long, where any given team can win at any given night, and now we're seeing where that's coming from. Now, where now we can have a potential 7th or 8th seed make it to the NBA Finals, or in some cases a potential play-in winning team to go to an NBA Finals. It's pretty interesting to say the least. But with teams that are still in the playoffs, and now that we are in the second round, there are teams that were eliminated in the first round. And we did talk about it on there were some upsets heading into, coming out of the first round. And the two teams in particular that honestly they got upsetted. If we're going to talk about purely their seeds and where their expectations, they got upset.
Well, the first one was a real upset.
Yes, the first
I think
one
the
was a real
second
upset.
one, like, you can argue, but again, based on your point about seeding, like, it shouldn't have happened. Right?
Exactly. And so now that we know in our current sort of way that we do things, we are going to be answering the question about what's next for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies, two teams that were top seeded teams in their respective conferences, both losing to bottom seeded teams in convincing fashion. To be honest with you, like I can't see any other way to put it. Like the Bucks got absolutely slapped by the Miami Heat, and the Memphis Grizzlies got basically their lunch money stolen by the Los Angeles Lakers.
Especially that last game.
Yeah, that last game was horrible. How much did they lose by? Like 40? Like it was
Yeah, it was
bad.
40.
It was
As Dylan Brooks said, he didn't respect anybody that didn't give him 40. Well, the whole Lakers team gave him 40.
they got 40. So yes, we're gonna be answering what's next for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies. But before we even get started on that, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more of the What's Next episodes coming up. And also, we'll be getting into more offseason content as the offseason kind of gets closer and closer. I believe that the NBA Draft Lottery is also coming up, so we might talk about that in a future episode. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss more of that. But starting us off with the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, the Milwaukee Bucks, they finished the regular season with a 58-24 record. They were first in the Eastern Conference and had the best record in the NBA. And again, it's just hard to fathom that the number one seed in the NBA got knocked out by an 8 seed that had to win a play-in game. They had to win 2 play-in games.
Yeah, they lost the first play-in game.
They lost the first play-in game. They had to win 2 play-in games to get to the playoffs, and the Milwaukee Bucks, and they got beat, but they beat the Milwaukee Bucks. And the Bucks, their stats, it's hard. It was hard for me to even figure out what went wrong. I mean, they were 12th in offensive rating in the regular season, 4th in defensive rating, 5th in net rating, 4th in 3-point attempts, 10th in 3-point percentage. You can probably argue this is probably their weakest category, where they're 27th in 2-point attempts and 11th in percentage. But even that, I mean, like, that's not the way they play. I mean, they play a very, 3-point heavy, system where Giannis is going to be driving, Giannis is going to be getting to the rim, but he's going to be kicking out to open shooters. And from that standpoint, they were doing a pretty good job of it in terms of percentages. Again, Giannis was an MVP candidate this season. Drew Holiday got an All-Star selection this season. Brook Lopez was a defensive all defensive team member and a defensive player of the year candidate. I mean, everything looked good. The Bucks were a good team. They were a very good team, as we all expected them to be. Despite even Chris Middleton being injured for a majority of the season, Giannis was hurt at parts of the season, and we'll talk about Giannis' injury in the playoffs as well. But they were a good team all year long, and in all honesty, they lost to an 8-seeded Miami Heat in 5 games, and they really just lost to Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler absolutely destroyed the Milwaukee Bucks. And again, the Bucks got outworked. And to be honest with you, I personally think they also got outcoached.
And the thing is, like, it wasn't even like a number one seed that everyone knew kind of wasn't up to par in the playoffs. Like, for example, in Atlanta Hawks back in, what was it, 2015. No no disrespect to Atlanta, but like we knew they weren't NBA Finals caliber team. The Milwaukee Bucks, everyone predicted them to be the NBA champion.
Yeah, I did.
A lot of people did, right? They were, I think, the favorite for a large chunk of the season, and for them to not only lose in the first round to the eighth seed, but to lose the way they did, especially as you mentioned, the coaching deficiencies. You know, those timeouts that they didn't use, the bad plays, taking out Brook Lopez in that last play where Jimmy Butler hit that game tying shot. Doing the same thing, for example, Greg Popovich did with Tim Duncan back in 2013. But coaching mistakes like that, you can't come back from, and unfortunately, Mike Budenholzer was the head got the axe.
I mean, he got outcoached. Like, there's no other way to sugarcoat it. And yes, the Bucks ended up firing Mike Budenholzer as a result of this. And again, he got outcoached. That's a whole other. That's what it was. But you also could argue he wasn't in the right frame of mind.
And
Obviously,
again, respect to him for like
of
what he
course,
did, right?
of course. Like again, he must have not been in the right frame of mind, and we can't really blame him for that either. With what was happening in his personal life. But that being said, you have to make the call. You're an NBA head coach, and if you're going to be coaching, you better be putting your all into it, and you cannot have your focus diverted. And unfortunately for Mike Budenholzer, that was just the situation he was in.
And again, the thing with Mike Budenholzer is the fact that if this was like a one-off thing, maybe you could say something different. Problem is, despite what happened to Mike Budenholzer in his personal life this year, this has kind of been Mike Budenholzer's MO for the majority of his coaching career. You can say, except for last season in the postseason.
Like we put up a clip on this on our social and even on YouTube about like the Mike Budenholzer firing. And what I said was that, I mean, to be honest with you, if he never won that 2021 championship, do we honestly still think Mike Budenholzer would be the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks
No.
right now? And the answer is no. Like we saw signs of it even dating back to 2019 when Nick Nurse made the adjustment and the Bucks had zero answers. I mean, we basically Canadian swept them. Like that's what we're calling it. I mean, listen, we
That's
gave
very
them the
much.
first two and then we won 4 straight. That's how it works, man. We were nice enough to give you 2, but we can date it all the way to back then when Mike Budenholzer just clearly never showed that he was a playoff caliber coach. I mean, you can even go back to his Atlanta days as well. Like there was a lot of evidence with Mike Budenholzer that he's a very good regular season coach. He's a very good system creator. It just doesn't work for him in the postseason.
And
And
again, that's what, like, he gets his money off of creating the system, as you said, right? He's really good at that. The problem is there's only a few coaches that in the playoffs can make those right adjustments. And he ran into arguably the best coach, I think, who's, well, at least like relevant on a good team right now.
in the Eastern Conference, at
Yeah.
least, he's the best coach in my opinion. But still, Mike Budenholzer, obviously, he's been fired. Now we have heard some potential names of who could be replacing him. Obviously, the number one candidate seems to be Nick Nurse. And I think it would be a good fit. It just depends on what the Bucks are going to be doing in the future, because we're going to get into it. But there's a lot of questions for the Bucks heading into this offseason, and that dictates how attractive of a job this is going to be. Just from the standpoint of coaching Giannis, every coach in the league would love to coach Giannis. But if it's Giannis and nobody else, I mean, that changes things in terms of the interest level. But Nick Nurse is obviously a candidate. Charles Lee is a current assistant with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's definitely been in a few other coaching conversations, but the Bucks might even look to him and hire him internally, kind of like a Dwayne Casey Nick Nurse situation where the assistant gets the promotion, and it does bring a fresher, newer perspective in there. Kenny Atkinson obviously is a big name. He's from the Warriors system, has previous head coaching experience. He could be someone who can look at this Bucks job and think it's pretty attractive. I think David Adelman, he's a current assistant with the Denver Nuggets. He's been up for the Raptors job and a couple other jobs as well. And then Kevin Young, a current assistant with the Phoenix Suns. He was the one responsible for Phoenix generating their new offensive identity under Monty Williams. So he's also been getting some looks as well. And then we've heard other names like Frank Vogel, Mike D'Antoni, which I don't even know why Mike D'Antoni is still getting consideration for head coaching jobs. But okay. I mean, Tom Thibodeau's back in the league, so what do I know? But yeah, like you can kind of see like the Bucks. They have some names, but the weird thing is that the interest level just isn't really as you would expect with the Bucks being open. And I think that has a lot to do with their future. Like their future is pretty up in the air right now. Speaking of, let's move into the notable free agents heading into this offseason. The biggest one is arguably Chris Middleton. He has a player option with $40 million this season. I There's a chance he can opt in, but I'm pretty sure he's gonna opt out of it. Like he could probably get a bigger deal elsewhere or stay with Milwaukee, but I think he'd want to secure himself long term rather than playing on a 1 year deal.
I think especially with the injuries starting to kind of pile up a little bit
Exactly.
too much, he probably wants that one big deal now.
Yeah, but the problem is it's $40 million of a player option, and will he get more than that? That's the question. Brooke Lopez, he's an unrestricted free agent, and I did talk about the fact that he was an all defensive team member and he was a defensive player of the year candidate this season. So he had a pretty good season for the Milwaukee Bucks, but he's an unrestricted free agent. He's also 35 years old right now. Do the Bucks want to re-sign him, and to how much? That's the other question. Well, how much money will he command? Jay Crowder, he's also an unrestricted free agent. He also barely played in Milwaukee, to be honest with you. Although he asked out of Phoenix to get to Milwaukee, and
Yeah, man, he's completely washed, bro. He couldn't even stay in front of like anybody.
yeah, like that. I think Jay Crowder is pretty much done. Joe Ingles, unrestricted free agent, still a crafty veteran. I just don't see him staying in Milwaukee. I just think he's too old on a team that's already very old. Like he probably will go to another contender and still be a decent role player, but yeah, Jingles is an unrestricted free agent. Wes Matthews, he's also an unrestricted free agent. He's been a decent role player in Milwaukee, but it's kind of getting to the point where he's getting into the Jay Crowder territory where it's really hard to kind of play him consistent minutes. Uh,
Especially when he's not even making his jumpers, man. That's it's kind of a tough sell.
exactly, like that's his biggest calling card. Like he's a floor space and outside shooter, and I still think that he can still hop on another contender. I just don't know if it's going to be Milwaukee. And the last one I wanted to mention was Javon Carter. He had the player option. He was their de facto backup point guard. Um, I think with him, he's just limited offensively. He's a great energy. He can bring a lot of energy on the defensive end. He's just pretty limited on the offensive end.
I mean, he has spurts where he plays really good on both ends of the court. But I mean, that's kind of what he is. Now, again, Milwaukee can, I think, easily retain him. And
Yeah,
I think that would be a good choice for them to do so. But I think he'll get some interest.
no, he'll definitely get some interest. But I think if Milwaukee, like you said, if they want to retain him, they could definitely do it. But I think they probably look to upgrade that position. Now, in terms of what do the Milwaukee Bucks actually need heading into next season? Well, first and foremost, I mean, they need a new head coach. They need somebody now who can come in and maximize Giannis' talents, keep the team competitive, but also be a playoff caliber coach, a coach that can make the right adjustment in the playoffs, which is what they've been lacking. Basically, they need a guy who can come in and tinker and make sure that they can make the right moves, the right decision in order to put the Bucks in the best position to succeed. Um, I don't really know who that is. Like I said, the biggest name I can think of is Nick Nurse. I
I think
think
he's a perfect fit,
he
man.
is a perfect fit, but the question with that, I think if I'm Nick Nurse, what am I asking him? Like, okay, well, what's your long term plan with the franchise? Because now the Bucks have new ownership as well, so it's a
Shout out. Yo, Bucks fans, have fun with Jimmy Haslam.
listen, bro. He hasn't been having much fun in football, so I think he wanted to try his luck with basketball, but that so
Perfect
far
timing, man. Perfect timing.
he tanked them already. Like he just took over the team and this happens. Man, wow. Oh boy. The Browns curse is real.
I
it's,
mean,
it's a
yeah, I think
contagious
so,
thing,
man.
man. But basically, if I'm Nick Nurse, like I'm asking the new ownership, Jimmy Haslam and stuff, what's the direction for the team? What's the plan? Are you trying to retain Giannis? Because otherwise, why would he sign long term with this team? Like I think for a season or two, this Bucks job looks attractive, but long term it probably doesn't. The next thing I think the Bucks need to do is they need to get younger. They're the oldest team in the league. They have a lot of their core players are free agents, and like I mentioned, like Brooke Lopez is 35, Chris Middleton I believe is 30 or 31. Jingle is 35, Wes Matthews is over 30. Like these are all guys like on their team that are over the age of 30. Giannis is approaching 30 as well. Like it's an older team now. It's no longer a young upstart now. They need to start getting younger, cheaper players to come in and restock the cupboards a little bit more. Um, and I think again they need to first off. in order to figure out what the depth is, they need to figure out the core going forward. Like Chris Middleton's can be a free agent this offseason. Drew Holiday can be a free agent next offseason because he has a player option next year. And then a year after that, Giannis has his player option. So it really begs to the question on, do the Bucks want to stick with this core? Now, Drew Holiday is also 32 years old. Next year he'll be 33. Do you want to retain him? Drew Holiday's also talked about retiring at 35. So it's an interesting situation in Milwaukee. And it's also about, like I said, Chris Middleton has a $40 million player option. Are you really going to give this guy a contract where he's going to make close to $50 million a season? I don't know. I don't think he's that type of player. But if you're looking at what the market dictates, I mean, you might end up having to, and it's one of those conversations where you really got to weigh in the pros and cons. That is it worth keeping the guy or maybe going after somebody else? And that's going to be the decision Milwaukee's going to have to make because the goal is to convince Giannis to stay in Milwaukee past this current contract. And yeah, they have to figure out what the core is going forward. They also need more shot creators off the bench. I think the Bucks, the problem is, and what we saw in the playoffs, is they rely way too much on Giannis. Now, Giannis missed a couple of games because of injury, and it was an unfortunate injury. He slipped. He slipped, right?
I think he got fouled or something.
Yeah,
But either way, he hurt his back.
yeah, he hurt his back. It was like a freak play. I mean, nobody could see it coming. But again, the Bucks fell apart without Giannis there, and
Well, I mean, they got one, but again, like the system relies so heavily on Giannis. I think is your point.
yeah, exactly. So I think getting some other guys who can create their own looks off the bench might be the best thing for them. They need like maybe like a bench gunner, someone that can still keep things afloat if Giannis isn't there or one of the starters aren't there. So that's something I think they should look into. And then they need a backup big and some wing depth. I think you're seeing with some of the guys that are now leaving, going to be most likely leaving the team. They don't have a guy to back up Brook Lopez. They don't have any additional wings, beyond maybe like Grayson Allen and Pat Connaughton, who for whatever reason Mike Budenholzer loves his Pat Connaughton.
I mean, he played really well. What was it, last season or the year they won the championship?
Yeah,
Um,
that's what
and
he
to
got.
be fair, man, he's been good for the Bucks.
He
But
got paid for it because of that.
it's just, I mean, they do need to get better.
No, they definitely need to get better on the wing. So yeah, so those are what I think the Bucks absolutely need for next season. In terms of the draft this year, they don't have a first round pick. They have a 1 second rounder. They'll either use it or flip it. I mean, it really doesn't matter for the Bucks at this point. They're really trying to be competitive. Um, Bringing me finally into their potential moves, and this is something that I had to think about a little bit in terms of what would I do in Milwaukee, and I think it comes back down to what are the best moves in order to keep Giannis happy. And the first thing I think is re-sign Chris Middleton. It's a tough pill to swallow in terms of like what the monetary value would be of that contract, but in terms of the weighing, can you get someone better who fits with Giannis? It's tough. Chris Middleton can play both ends of the floor. He fits with Giannis, and when healthy, he's a pretty good player. Like he's a borderline all-star to all-star player. So that's a good player to have. Now I think he might even be willing to take a pay cut as well to stay in Milwaukee and make them a more competitive team. So that might also be a more of an incentive to re-sign Chris Middleton. I also think you should re-sign Brook Lopez after the season that he's had. I think it should be on a cheaper, shorter term deal. That would be the ideal scenario if I'm the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, will Brook Lopez take a deal like that? I don't know. But in terms of where he's at in his career, I think he wants to win. And if the Bucks want to be competitive, he's going to have to maybe scale back on the type of money that he's taking in order to make the team better as
Especially
a whole.
the length.
Yeah, no, I think maybe max 2 to 3 year deal is going to be what he's going to get. But in terms of the money, you gotta think. I think you should bring him back. Like I don't see another center that you can bring in that fits as well as Brook does with Giannis. Right now, at least in the NBA. Then in terms of some other free agents that you can potentially sign, I mean, I brought up Dario Saric would be a pretty good addition off the bench. He can score, he can space the floor a little bit. He's a good big to bring off the bench. Mason Plumlee again, a big to back up Brook Lopez, a good role player. You can play within different combinations. So that one's a pretty interesting one. Another option would be if you don't re-sign one of Middleton or Lopez, you can go after some bigger name players like Gary Trent Jr. I think would be a great either starting or off the bench for Milwaukee. He would be great. he can score. That there's that option right there. I mean, he's in that price range, but it depends on, again, how do you make the money work? Seth Curry would be another name. I think you can probably sign him cheaper than someone like Gary Trent would, but he would be a great guy, a floor spacer, guy who can hit some big shots in big moments. He's gone deeper in the playoffs. He'd be interesting. I think Fred VanVleet is actually a very interesting name in Milwaukee as well because let's say you don't re-sign Brook Lopez. Well, now you have money to pay Fred, and then you have a starting lineup of Fred, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton. You can start either Bobby Portis or somebody, and then Giannis. Like, I think that's a pretty good starting five uh for the Milwaukee Bucks. So Fred VanVleet's an interesting one. And then again, Jordan Clarkson is your typical bench gunner who I think makes the most amount of sense to come off the bench and just be that offense for the Bucks for the bench. Like, they don't have that creator right now, and he's the perfect guy that you can bring off the bench. And then again, our last name would be Nas Reed, but I just don't know if they can afford him. But overall, I mean, the Bucks, they need a reset. Like, they're at a junction point now where they need to tweak their roster in order to really determine their future, in order to keep Giannis happy, in order for them to keep on winning. They can't have another embarrassing performance like they did in this year's playoffs, and that means they gotta make some tough decisions. So we'll see what happens with Milwaukee, but they're in a pretty tough spot.
Speaking of another team that lost, kind of embarrassingly in the first round, as we talked about, is we're talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. Now the Memphis Grizzlies finished 51-31. They actually finished second in the West. They had a 15th overall offensive rating. They were second in defensive rating. Interestingly, one stat I noticed was that they were bottom half of the league in percentage. When we're talking about field goal percentage and 3-point percentage, they were 16th in field goal percentage and 23rd in 3-point percentage. So, especially the latter stat, I think really bit them in the playoffs. Um, and to be fair, like they had a pretty good season, at least on paper. Especially when you factor in all of the issues they had. John Morant was good when he played. Um, Jaren Jackson Jr. obviously won the Defensive Player of the Year award. He was first time All Star. He took that next step forward. Luke Kennard, best 3-point shooter in the league this season. Desmond Bain took a step forward. Tyus Jones, I think, at least in the regular season, was his usual, like, arguably best backup point guard in the league self. Um,
I mean, pre All-Star break, the Memphis Grizzlies were like really really good.
and Steven Adams was really good for them as well. He was a perfect fit in terms of rebounding, his passing, his screen setting was obviously very big for them. So the Memphis Grizzlies actually had a pretty good season when you don't factor in all of the issues they had. But of course, that's where I think everyone thinks about when we think about the Milwaukee Bucks. Not the Milwaukee Bucks, the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think a lot of it, not just the off court issues, but the on court issues really started when Steven Adams got injured. His lack of presence or him not playing really exposed a lot of issues on the team. The team was, I think, the best rebounding team in the league. And then when Steven Adams got injured, they were essentially like one of the worst rebounding teams in the league. Their assists went down. As I talked about, the rebounding went down. Steven Adams is also one of the best screen setters in the league. They just couldn't run their actions as good without Steven Adams, taking up that space on the screens, especially a guy like John Morant who wants to, attack downhill with Steven Adams screening for him. They just did not have that presence there. Luke Kennard coming off of pin downs and whatnot on threes, right? Steven Adams, his absence really, really hurt the team. Now, the argument was how much was he going to actually play in the playoffs, because we've seen that story over and over again with guys like JV, Steven Adams, the big slower centers. How much can you really play them in the playoffs? But the issue is exposed issues in the regular season for them. And then they didn't even have the option to go to Steven Adams in the playoffs, which is what really, I think, hurt them. When Jaren Jackson Jr. was getting dominated by AD in the playoffs, especially on the defensive end, you don't have the option to go to Steven Adams who can push AD out the lane.
And I think that's where it comes down to matchup. When you're talking about those type of bigs, certain matchups, of course, it's hard to play them. But in terms of like a matchup like this, where like what they were with the Lakers, where you had AD, you need a guy bigger than AD in order to take care of him. Like, there's a reason why AD struggled with bigger players. Like, he struggled with the guys like Embiid, Jokic. Those are the guys he usually struggles against, like the bigger dudes. And Steven Adams would have been a great asset for them to have in that playoff series. But
I think especially in the non-AD minutes, the Lakers don't have a backup big man essentially. Wenyan Gabriel, they've been throwing him out there a little
it
bit.
was supposed to be Mo Bamba, but the guy's
Oh
hurt.
yeah, well, I mean he hasn't even played in the last bit, so Jaren Jackson Jr. The Lakers were essentially matching up Jaren Jackson Jr.'s minutes with AD. Now when you don't have AD in the game, and you don't have Jaren Jackson in the game for Memphis, that's when you have a guy like Steven Adams who can really punish the Lakers, or Wenyan Gabriel and whatnot. So I think that was a real issue for them. But overall, as everyone knows, the issues with this team were not mostly on the court. On the court, they were pretty good. The issues with this team revolved off the court. John Morant's suspension really killed the flow of the team, and just his antics in general. Wannabe thug man, wannabe hood man, John Morant. Right? That's the issue. Him doing all the stuff he did, and again, like I said, he got himself suspended. It's not that his actions were just hurtful on himself or impacted himself. It really killed the flow and the momentum of the Memphis Grizzlies. Now you can say, oh, they won all those games without John Morant, but it's a different feeling when you're able to get the reps in with your star that is going to prepare you for the playoffs. You can argue that's one of the reasons why they did not play as good as they could have in the playoffs is the lack of reps, right? Without your main star. He only played 50 something games this past season.
I mean,
So when you don't have enough reps with your main star, you don't get the reps that you would like to have had before the playoffs.
it trickles down. It starts from the top. That if your star player is setting a precedence like that type of behavior and that type of precedence, it trickles down. Everybody, and then that is the identity of your team. Whatever your star player is, and you can call it a different example. Like Kobe's teams were always intense. Tim Duncan's teams were always the quiet but fundamentally solid teams. John Morant mouthed it off and got himself in trouble off the court. The Memphis Grizzlies were a mouthy, very loud and noisy team. And again, I think some of the blame has to go to like Taylor Jenkins as well, because even if he didn't say anything in that, the fact that he didn't condone this behavior or didn't clap down on this type of on the chirping earlier meant that he knew it was happening, so he just let it happen, and that I think led to their downfall, where he didn't hold his players as accountable as he should have held them. These are young players, and then you talk about the impact of a guy like Steven Adams. Steven Adams is I think he's the oldest guy on the team. Like, if he's your oldest, Danny Green is there too, but
Well, I mean, not anymore.
not anymore. But he was there. But Steven Adams is the oldest guy on your team. He's the grown up in the room, and everyone else is younger kids and stuff. So it's up to the head coach to take control of that situation and to not allow the mistakes of one player to affect the team's overall play.
Yeah, man. Especially that trickles down to guys like Dylan Brooks, Desmond Bain, Jaren Jackson Jr. You can essentially only have one loudmouth on the team, and we know Dylan Brooks is that guy, right? He's been that for his whole career going back to college. So you can only have one guy max like that on your team. When you have everyone doing that, it becomes an issue. It becomes a locker room. And we saw that with the Memphis Grizzlies. And of course, as I mentioned, it culminated in a first round loss to LA Lakers, especially that embarrassing Game 6 blowout. Tyus Jones, unfortunately, this kind of being a trend in his career where he disappears in the playoffs. You can't even recognize him like that he was on the court half the time. John Morant, I think he had some good moments, especially that 40-point game he had, but overall he wasn't good enough. I think injury obviously, but then also it goes back to the reps thing.
Shot
Right?
selection was pretty poor for Ja as well. There were just certain shots that you were just taking that he was taking that just didn't make a ton of sense, or it's just like, bro, you're gonna get injured if you keep doing that. Like, his play style is very reckless.
Triple J really got killed by AD on both ends of the court, and AD I think really took it personal, right? That he didn't even get like any defensive player of the year garner or any attention for that award. And he really showed how big of a gap there is between his defense and Triple J's defense.
Listen, man, we got a new nickname for AD, so I think this is a successful playoff run already.
Yeah.
Alternate days, man.
Alternate days. Dylan Brooks, of course, was just bad on offense. And the team just did not play good at all. That's the one thing that really killed them in the series. They just did not shoot good at all. Going to their notable free agents, the only notable free agent they have is, of course, Dylan Brooks, who we know is not coming back to the team, according to
That's
Shams.
crazy. When does a team announce that they're not coming back, like under any
I
circumstances?
think that was Shams just putting a clutch PR spin on it.
Probably, but like, listen, man. The fact that the team announced that, hey, we ain't bringing you back, like, it says a lot into what they thought about Dylan Brooks. They're done with him. They
And to
absolutely
be
were.
fair, to be fair to Dylan Brooks, I think this guy's getting
Oh,
scapegoated a little bit.
absolutely,
He's getting scapegoated. Again, I think it's the problem. The problem starts up top, which goes to my point about their team needs. You gotta first off fix the culture. That comes from up top. That comes from management. That comes from Taylor Jenkins first and foremost. Then it goes to the team leader, who is John Morant. You cannot be having any of these off-court incidents anymore. You're a team leader. You're getting paid $50 million a season, whatever it is. You're a star player. You're one of the best, let's say, 15 players in the league. You cannot be moving like how you're moving, and especially when it affects your team, right? So I think they need to reset the culture. I think they've started doing that with Dylan Brooks, but I don't like the way he was let go in terms of how it was portrayed, and I don't think that's a good step in terms of resetting the culture, in terms of how they broke that relationship up.
Like, I have faith in Taylor Jenkins in terms of him turning this around. I think the culture in Memphis started off really good. It started off with a really fun culture. It became progressively toxic as it went on, and I think that had to do with a few bad apples in the room. But yeah, they got to crack down a little bit more on these behaviors for sure.
And to do that, they need to get some more veterans in there. We talked about Steven Adams essentially being the only vet in the room. He can be the only vet in the room. And especially we know Steven Adams is not the most like confrontational guy either,
He's just there for
especially in
the
the
vibes.
locker room. Yeah. So I think you need like how we saw like a guy like PJ Tucker, those kind of confrontational veterans who are not afraid to, step to John Morant or
Yeah,
step to Desmond Bain
keep the
and
guys
will
in
get
line.
in their face
Yeah,
about it.
keep them in line.
Exactly. I think they also need some perimeter defense. I talked about this in a few episodes ago. Dylan Brooks is essentially their only perimeter defender. And that's not a
Yeah.
good thing when you have a John Morant and a Desmond Bain who are both, especially John Morant, negative defenders. Now, you do have a defensive player of the year guy in Jaren Jackson Jr., who really does fix a lot of problems on the defensive end, but you need at least one defender on the perimeter. And with Dylan Brooks being gone, you have a huge hole
I mean,
at the top.
they tried at the trade deadline, but like that was a flaw with the team all season. Like it's not something. It wasn't something new, and it just got exposed even more in the playoffs.
Shooting as well, as I talked about, they really sucked at shooting, especially in the playoffs. And Dylan Brooks being their only defender, so he had to be on the court, but also being a terrible shooter. They need some more of a balance, right? They need a bit better balance. Also they need some more real bench production that will help in the playoffs. As I talked about, their depth really helped the season in the regular season, right? But when you get to the playoffs, their depth was non-existent. Santi Aldama, he played okay from time to time in that first round. As I talked about, Tyus Jones, absolutely non-existent. Luke Kennard, unfortunately, we see this with shooters every single time. If you're not bringing anything else to the court, you're going to get benched in the playoffs. And Luke Kennard does not bring anything else in the court, especially except for his shooting. So the problem is Memphis has some good role players, but they need role players that they can use in the playoffs, especially, right? So I think that is one issue for them, and find a way to get some boards, especially on the defensive end. When Steven Adams is not there, you cannot be the worst rebounding team in the league and completely banking your whole strategy on Steven Adams. So
Yeah,
I think you need
some size.
some size would be nice, or just some guys. Maybe you need to tweak the scheme a little bit. Who knows? In terms of their draft, they have a first rounder this year. They
That's
also have
surprising that they have their first
yeah,
rounder.
they also have 2 second round picks this year. Um, they're not really valuable. Even the first round pick, I don't think is gonna be that valuable. So
It's
it's
gonna be
about, I
mid
think,
20s.
packaging those picks, which they did try to do at the trade deadline, but unfortunately for them, nothing came up. So I think for them, as I mentioned, packaging those picks would probably be the course of action. Now in terms of some potential moves for them, the one thing we have to preface is that they will probably have some money issues going forward. With having to pay Desmond Bain, they are not paying Desmond Bain currently, but they will have to pay him after next season. I guess from technically this season moving forward, they can, I think, extend him. But Desmond Bain will command a decent amount of money. You already have John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. on the books. You have Steven Adams, I think, for one more year after this season. Um, and again, it becomes an issue of how much value are you placing on your star players, on your core, and how you're gonna fill out the rest of the team, especially if you're not being able to get to a conference finals.
I mean, like a guy like Desmond Bain. I mean, he's a great shooter. He's a great offensive piece, but how effective is he on the defensive end? That's a question mark with me. With him, I think they gotta really determine, is he a part of the core, and should he be paid like that, or should they look elsewhere? That's something they're gonna have to figure out pretty soon.
In terms of some possible trades they can explore this offseason, they already tried OG Anunoby at the trade deadline. I mean, you can try again, but I don't know.
What can they offer that the
That's the
Raptors would
problem.
want?
I think one interesting guy is Dorian Finney-Smith. I think he would help a lot of issues on the team in terms of shooting,
Uh,
and defense. But the problem is Dorian Finney-Smith does have like 3 years left on his deal, so I don't know how movable of a contract that is, especially with the lack of you know assets that Memphis can give up for him.
I mean, but he's a little bit more attainable since he's a player of excess for Brooklyn right now because they have McHale, they have Cam. Like they don't necessarily need Dorian Finney-Smith for on their team, but so maybe like a first rounder and something else
Well,
to probably shake him loose.
It will be picks that would probably get the deal done for Memphis, considering Brooklyn's obviously trying to rebuild. So I think Dorian Finney-Smith could be a real option on the trade market. But in terms of going to free agents, I have four names here that can help on the defensive end, potentially help on the offensive end as well. But again, 3 and D players are very hard to find. And I think big men, I don't know what they're gonna do in terms of big men, but Mason Plumlee, guys like those are
Like
options. But
cheaper guys, yeah.
when you're playing a guy like Steven Adams, when you're backing up a big center, you kind of need a guy that can, space the floor, play kind of that different role. I think they already have that in Xavier Tillman. I think he was pretty good for them in the playoffs too. So I think he can probably be looked at as him moving forward in his development. Him backing up Steven Adams in that role. But in terms of some forwards, I got Harrison Barnes. Um, he's gonna probably get some money, especially his agent, bro. His agent's the GOAT.
Goated, yo. Like that guy's gonna get him a bag again.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, why would Harrison Barnes leave the situation he's currently in with Sacramento? Unless Sacramento just can't afford him, I don't see Harrison Barnes leaving. In fact,
Or I
go to
mean, if they
Memphis.
can get an upgrade from Harrison Barnes, he hasn't had the best moments in the playoffs, and so for them, they might be looking to get a real upgrade at that spot. But who knows? Jalen McDaniels, not Jaden, unfortunately, because Jaden is not going anywhere. But Jalen McDaniels, he's a good bench piece. He's a good defender, like his brother. The offense is a bit spotty, of course, but like I mentioned, Memphis does need some perimeter defense. Dean Wade is also another
Oh, that's interesting.
nice bench piece who can play kind of both ends of the court a little bit. He's not gonna, solve any major issues for you, but he does contribute to, I think, winning on both ends of the court. And then Josh Okogie, I've mentioned him a couple of times in our previous episodes. He's really improved his offense. When he on the Phoenix Suns, it's not as good as it was in the regular season, but the potential is there, and if you can get enough out of him offensively, his defense is obviously amazing. So
Yeah.
I think those names right there can probably help the Memphis Grizzlies. But either way, I think this is a pivotal moment for them in terms of what they want to do moving forward. I think not just in terms of their team, because I think their team is already pretty good as it is, but in terms of the environment, the culture they want to establish, I think it's a real key moment for them, their franchise.
Listen, the Memphis Grizzlies are the cautionary tale to all NBA teams. Don't chirp unless you can back it up. Let's just put it out there. Like you can't talk if you can't walk it, then you shouldn't be talking it.
I mean, Draymond Green basically he
he
exposed
cl-
their team, man.
he clowned them so hard. Listen, LeBron even freaking was just like, listen, they they ran their mouths way too much and they got burned. They absolutely did. But we'll see what happens with both the Milwaukee Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies. Obviously, they're gonna have a lot of questions to answer in this offseason. And we'll see what happens. Moving on into a pretty short up and under segment for this week. First and foremost, are you up or under on the all defensive teams being announced? So we have the all defense first and second teams. And the all defensive first team, we have Alex Caruso and Drew Holiday as the two guards, Jaren Jackson and Evan Mobley as the two forwards, and Brooke Lopez as the center. The All NBA second team, we have Derek White and Dylan Brooks as the two guards. OG Anunoby and Draymond Green as the two forwards, and Bam Adebayo as the center.
I mean, I'm up, I guess. I think people were mad kind of because of the fact that it's a lot of new people on these all defensive teams.
I mean, Dylan Brooks.
Dylan Brooks is the one that I think people are very mad at. Now, granted, Dylan Brooks is a good defender. I'll give him that. But all defensive worthy.
I mean, they did have the second best defense in the defensive rating in the league, the Memphis Grizzlies. But Jaren Jackson won Defensive Player of the Year. He was their true defensive superstar, and that's why he won the award.
And again, if you're talking about guards, him beating out a guy like, for example, Marcus Smart.
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
Right, Defensive Player of the Year.
I know.
Last year.
I just realized that. Yeah, he wasn't even on the list.
So, I mean, I'm up. It's not like anybody didn't deserve it, but it is, I think, an interesting list.
Listen, bro, OG finally got his due, man. This man has been. Yo, he should have made first team, if I'm being perfectly honest with you.
He finally got it, man.
He finally got it. First guy since Kawhi to get a all-defensive team.
And Kawhi, honestly, I'm going to be honest, bro. Kawhi did not deserve that all-defensive.
Listen, bro. Shout out OG.
Yeah, shout out to OG, man. He finally got one. In terms of, are you up or under on the 2023 all-rookie team? So, the all-rookie first team is Paolo Banchero, Jalen Williams, Walker Kessler, Benny Mathurin, Keegan Murray. And then the all-rookie second team is Jaden Ivey, Tari Eason, Jalen Duren, Jabari Smith Jr., and Jeremy Sohan. So are you up or under on the all-rookie teams?
I mean, I'm up on it. I think the all-rookie first team is, I agree with it completely. The all-rookie second team, I mean, I know some of the players on this list.
I mean, it wasn't really it wasn't known to be a deep class anymore.
No, but yeah, it's a pretty good list. Shout out to the rookies. And finally, are you up or under on Nike signing Kevin Durant to a lifetime deal, basically putting him in the same company with Michael Jordan and LeBron James as the only NBA players to sign lifetime deals with a shoe brand.
Well, with Nike.
Or with Nike, sorry.
I mean, I'm up on it. Obviously, he's had a storied legacy with Nike. Do I put him in terms of the same category of brand power as LeBron James and Michael Jordan, especially with Nike? No, but I mean, KD, I think, especially with the Kobe, how do I put it? The Kobe business, not really being there for Nike anymore. I think Kevin Durant is a logical choice to kind of take that next step for them. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm up on it. Like, I don't really have any issues with it.
I mean, good for KD, but like you were saying, like I don't put him in the same class as LeBron or Michael.
Well, especially not even just the other things, but like in terms of
like not even
brand
Kobe
power.
either. Like
in terms of I think the brand power,
like I get it. Like they want maybe they're gonna start pushing more KD stuff more. Maybe they'll start putting out more, hopefully better shoes, in the future for KD. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, good for KD. I mean, I guess good for Nike. Basically, what it is. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so don't miss more great content from us in the future. Like I mentioned earlier, we will be getting into more offseason conversations. We're going to be doing more breakdowns on some of the team's offseason outlooks. So definitely stay tuned for that. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at UpLetterAndUnderPodcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast. For all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news as they occur. We are posting like more reactionary clips on our Instagram and even bringing them over to YouTube as well. So definitely subscribe or follow us on that channel so you don't miss out on that. And yeah, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode. If you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. Every episode is posted with the video, audio, and the written version all in one place. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, we are getting very close to the conference finals. Pretty crazy to say that the NBA season is basically almost over.
Time flies.
It does, man. We're freaking May. Like,
that's crazy.
We're in May, man. Like, this is insane. But yeah, with that concludes this episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.